This is Frankie Lynch, Saturn Girl. Like this video and subscribe to my channel. Comment below because I want to know what you think and it helps me out with the algorithm. But this is part 7 in my Synastry series where we take a look at individual aspects in Synastry. So for those of you who don't remember, Synastry is where we take two people's natal charts and compare them to see how they interact. That means we look for aspects between one person's natal planets and the others. So each of our natal planets in Synastry represents psychological facets of ourselves, as well as very literal people, places, and things. But when it comes to relationships, we primarily look at the psychological interpretations. Relationships themselves are like psychological collisions. We crash into each other. We push each other's buttons that we didn't even know we had. And it changes us. So, in a particular aspect, like we said, between two people, we talk about one person being represented by their planet and the other person being represented by their natal planet. So, for example, if your Jupiter is square my Venus, you are the Jupiter person and I am the Venus person. Does that make sense? Okay, very cool. So, in unpacking this fun aspect here, we got to first think about what Venus means. Well, she's how we relate to people here. And this is Venus in Synastry, right? This is how we relate to people in general, not just romantically. It could entail friendships, it could entail work relationships, whatever. Our children. She's our sense of beauty, aesthetic. She's our taste, what we're attracted to, what we like. She's also what repels us. You know, she's good taste and bad taste. She's how we love and how we give love, how we want to be loved. Well, what are the lunar nodes? So I recommend, if you want more information on the lunar nodes, oh, I don't have it right here, but to read Demetra George's book, Ancient Astrology, Theory and Practice. I believe it's volume 1. Anyway, the lunar nodes are where the moon's orbit intersects the Earth's orbit around the sun. The ecliptic, right? The ecliptic is the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun. So you could think of it as sort of the plane of the solar system. Anyway, so it's where the moon's orbit intersects the ecliptic. The place where the moon intersects the ecliptic, moving upward, or I guess I should go upward this way, upward towards celestial north, that was called the North Node. And then when the moon comes back around this way, moving downward towards celestial south, where the moon intersects the ecliptic there, going downward from relative to us, that's called the South Node, going towards celestial south. So these were referred to in ancient times as the dragon's head and tail. Because of the appearance of the eclipse swallowing the sun, it was thought of as a serpent, the mythical serpent, the dragon, swallowing the sun. And there was even the belief that if you were out during an eclipse, it was a very malefic event because that dragon would get you. He'd get you, right? Silly dragon. Anyway, so hence the nodes were seen as malefic in ancient astrology, right? They weren't seen as we see them in modern times as karma, past lives, reincarnation, and soul evolution, whatever those things mean. I'm not saying those aren't relevant at all. I'm saying let's take a look at what these traditionally meant. So in ancient astrology, the North Node in particular, the North Node was associated with increases. So the North Node would increase the good and the bad. if you have Jupiter, say, conjunct the North Node, Jupiter's effects will be amplified if he's happy. And we'll talk about dignity in another video. But you see, the North Node will amplify the benefic effects of Jupiter, the good effects, whereas the North Node will also amplify or exacerbate the malefic effects of a malefic, say Mars, right? You will probably have a life fraught with conflict, or somewhere a not too pleasant conflict could result in fate. So you can interpret that however you want. I got to be careful of YouTube's, TOS, guidelines. So anyway, the South Node, on the other hand, you may have guessed, decreases things. So again, he would decrease the influence of a benefic, unfortunately, but also decrease the influence of a malefic, fortunately. And we're particularly talking about conjunctions here with the nodes. So, but when it comes to synastry, we'll look at all the aspects, at least all the traditional aspects, except for the sextile, and I'll tell you why in just a bit. So, the house placement in which the nodes are situated will tell you something about what is increasing and decreasing. So the modern notion of past lives, right, and the reincarnation and soul evolution stuff. So where that came from was cross-cultural exchange between India and the Theosophical Society in the 1800s, the late 1800s. The Theosophical Society, which I talk about quite frequently because I studied that stuff for 17 years. The Theosophical Society was founded by Madame Helena Blavatsky and her hetero life mate, Colonel Steele Olcott, in 1875. It was an organization that sought to bridge the spiritual teachings of the East and West. So it was sort of, unifying Western occultism with Eastern philosophy. And that has its own issues, right? But it did create a certain reciprocity or uniformity between Vedic astrology and modern astrology. So, for example, Alan Leo, who is considered the granddaddy of modern astrology, was a bigwig in the TS, the Theosophical Society, in India, where they had their headquarters. So Alan Leo had a big influence, needless to say, on astrology in general, but Vedic astrology even. So you might notice in Vedic astrology, they do the 12-letter alphabet these days, the signs equal houses. That was another modern development. So anyway, that's worth noting here. In Vedic astrology, the North Node is known as Rahu. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but there you go. I always sort of make fun of Westerners who say Rahu and Ketu. I mean, it's just a joke, chill, but it's like, it's sort of like saying namaste at a drive-through window, It just seems a little much or excessive. But, do what you want, and it's all valid. So, the North Node is Rahu, and the house placement indicates where you desire increase, particularly in material things. Once again, a lot of this information is available in Demetra George's book, Ancient Astrology Theory and Practice, Volume 1. Okay? So, Rahu, the North Node, indicates what you desire, where you desire increase. It's not always good. It can be to your detriment. For example, mine's in the 5th house, and, I'm a little obsessive when it comes to romance. So, Anyway. And then, the South Node, Ketu, known as Ketu. And the house placement indicates more liberation. You see, Ketu, opposite the North Node, indicated what was sort of decreasing, right? But that means it was also liberation from matter, right? Whereas the North Node was the desire for matter or material things. The South Node was release or liberation from those things, and hence associated with the idea of moksha, or liberation from the wheel of samsara, or birth and rebirth, or pain and suffering, you see? So it indicates an acquiescence to the divine in certain traditions. So now, how do I use the nodes in Synastry? Well, I use the modern interpretation still, even though I make fun of them here and there. But along with the notions of desire and increase and decrease, those both factor into this interpretation too. So anyway, I'll treat the North Node as what is new and exciting, and the South Node as what is familiar. I treat the North Node as the future and the South Node as the past. Particularly, I think of the North Node as new lessons and the South Node as old lessons or things you're carrying over from the past. If you believe in reincarnation and all that sort of thing, you can sort of attach it to that. If you don't and you say YOLO, then it's what the first part of your life was guided by it, and the recapitulation is in the South Node, whereas the North Node indicates the future and what you're to do, especially after what? The second nodal return after age 38 or so. You see, the nodes have an 18-year cycle. It takes 18 point something 6 or whatever years for the nodes to return to their same zodiacal position. Anyway, the North Node is new lessons, the South Node is old ones. So personally, the life motif or direction will tend towards the South Node, like I just said, until the second nodal return around 38 or so. Now, what do these two mean together in Synastry? Well, this means you're combining the way one partner loves and needs to be loved, their tastes, their desires, with the other person's sense of life motif, direction, and their sense of destiny and their fortune in life. This is why it feels fated, or karmic, right? Now, everything's karmic because the Buddha described karma as volition. He said, having willed, a person acts through body, speech, and mind. Anyway, so together in Synastry, this is why it feels fated or karmic, because the relationship will affect the general trend of your entire life. These are the relationships that change you for good or for ill. And this is also depending on other things in the chart. So Jewel Mayberry, who's another relationship astrologer I followed when I was younger, she says that the planet person sort of feeds the node person in these aspects. So now, in one respect, this can be mutually nourishing, right? The node person will feel a certain part of their life has been expanded by the planet person. And the planet person will feel that their force or influence is useful or appreciated. There's a sense of fulfillment through this symbiosis, if you will. Now, it's also the node person who can go a bit too far with the increase in taking or draining the planet person. It can feel like the node person is just sort of a little black hole, or takes. But this can go both ways. The planet person can fill that role too. These are just the typical expressions that I see in my own relationships, of which I've had many, practice runs, I guess, and those of clients. Now, so the North Node contacts will tend to increase the planet's expression. For example, a Mars North Node contact, which I've had in relationships, will tend to make the Mars person more aggressive, or will tend to foster or stimulate conflicts. The South Node contacts will tend to decrease the planet person's expression. For example, Mars South Node may be less inclined towards arguments. They may decrease in the relationship over time. So, now we're not going to address sextiles here. Remember, I mentioned that earlier, and let me tell you why. Because Typically, a trine to one node is also a sextile to the other. You see? Because we have 180 degrees, right, to play with here. Or we have to get to 180 degrees between these two angles, right? A sextile is 60 degrees and a trine is 120 degrees. 60 plus 120 is 180, right? So there you go. Those two together sort of, they complement each other. So when you have an aspect to one, you'll necessarily have that aspect to the other. So the sextiles are more of the lesser benefic aspect. So we look at the trines, okay? The trines and the conjunctions together as the more benefic stuff. Okay, so let's start then with the North Node contacts with Venus through trine or conjunction. So in this case, the conjunction is a benefic aspect because it's a benefic planet, it's Venus. Even though traditionally the nodes were sort of seen as not so good. But these can be more harmonious. It feels like this was meant to be. It feels new and exciting and captivates your attention. These relationships can even swallow us up or envelop us. This is the kind of person I've always wanted to be with, we say. It feels unavoidable, like a vortex that just sucks us in, like we don't even have a choice in the matter. Sometimes it can feel like falling in love, right? But sometimes we fall in love with just the idea of love or the idea of a relationship rather than the relationship or the person themselves. We can frequently apologize for a lot of their toxic behavior. Now, the South Node, when it comes to trines and conjunctions, I have this currently with someone. It feels super easy. It's super familiar. There's a sense of having known each other for ages almost. I have Venus trine her South Node, and it feels like I can just relax and be myself around her. And like I'm not so concerned with showing off or pretense or whatever. And things can unfold pretty naturally. I like that. So, it feels like you have a shared history or past. Like, I know what you're feeling. Like Bill Clinton, I feel your pain, right? We have a sense of having gone through similar things. Oh, and I have this, I forgot you. I have this chart up just to show you, like, oh, here is, what's it called? Here's Venus, right, at 29 Leo. We're pretending these are people's charts, right? And here's the North Node at 29 Aries. So we see the trine there. Or wait, never mind. Oh, here's the trine. So here's the trine here, Venus and the North Node in two people's charts. So now I talked a little bit about my stuff. Shared history and past, right? We have the same life story. Like, oh my gosh. There's a sense of being able to relate to each other. Sometimes we share in the healing process together because past things are coming up through our relationship. Now, I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way, because this is an easy aspect. But it's not always comfortable bringing things up from your past, is it? So remember, the conjunctions have a similar expression here to the trines. They're just way more potent. You see? Way more potent. Now, North Node contacts. But these are squares and oppositions. So this is the North Node square or opposite Venus. Now, these are hard aspects, of course. Malefic aspects, not so easy. But the hard aspects can still carry that fated quality. It can also feel like falling in love with the idea more so than the person, right? Just like the trine can be, but the trines are sort of easier. The positive thing about the squares and oppositions is they tend to make things manifest and make things happen. But just the same, it's very difficult. So there's often a feeling of being star-crossed lovers or being terribly separated by circumstance or position or location in some way. There's a feeling like it will never happen, right? Feeling separated or cut off. It's often unrequited love, where you may really, really, really be obsessed with a person or really like someone and they just don't like you back, or vice versa. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I should probably start over, but we're really deep into this, so I'm not going to. Um, and there's a sense or possibility of becoming overly obsessive with the person. Now, what about south node contacts with Venus through a square or opposition, through a hard aspect? Well, there's a sense of not being able to relax around someone. There's just a sense of underlying tension that you can't be yourself. Sometimes you feel like you have unresolved issues from the past with this person. You know, that same sort of karmic relationship, but you just can't put your finger on it. It's a certain je ne sais quoi. I don't know what, right? Um, Oftentimes there's a sense of why are we even together? There may be a sense of feeling obligated to be together or unable to break up. Maybe one partner is giving to their own detriment. Oftentimes it's a planet partner, but it can go both ways. For example, in one relationship, my Jupiter was conjunct a partner's south node. I didn't realize I was being drained of resources the whole time. So, it's just an example, personal one. But even the hard aspects between these, one's a planet, one's a point. I almost said between these planets, but the North Node isn't a planet. But you see, even the hard aspects between Venus and the nodes, the lunar nodes, can work in a relationship. And they can be resolved. Now, that's depending on the fact if both partners sincerely want to work on this together, that they sincerely love each other and want to be together. Working on relationships only happens in good faith. You can't have a part-time soldier or one person who's more invested than the other. It just won't work. So the other thing about this is we have to be aware of when things just won't work, when we need to walk away, and we need to decide what we're willing to tolerate. Anyway, thank you for watching all the way to the end. Once again, I do wonderful readings. You can see all my contact information and my social media information in the description. And like I said, you need to like this video. You need to subscribe to my channel. And you need to comment below. Share these with your friends. And I will be adding more and more Synastry videos as things progress. So anyway, thank you. I love you. And have a wonderful whatever you're having.